Hi everybody, this is Miss Huval. Today's video is for English 2 and it deals with the subject of figurative language. I'm calling this What Adds Sparkle to a Poem. This presentation includes personification, pathetic fallacy, simile, alliteration, connotation versus denotation, onomatopoeia, apostrophe, and synecdoche. The poems I'll cover in this presentation are number 5 on your poem sheet, I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud, number 9, First Lesson, and number 14, Meeting at Night. So for this to be really helpful, it'd be great for you to have your poetry terms out in front of you and these poems so you can take notes. So pause me until you get yourself situated, and then we'll be ready to continue. So, figurative language is language that's intended to create an image, an association, or another effect in the mind of the listener or reader. And this effect goes beyond the literal meaning or the expected use of the words involved. Figurative language is stuff you've been learning your whole academic career. Similes, metaphors, personification, alliteration, things like that. When we analyze figurative language, we can gain insight into a poem's beauty and its power to move us, because poetry always stands the test of time because it speaks to what's basically human in us. And even though Shakespeare might have lived hundreds of years ago, his observations about love and time still touch us today. A poet's style, as it relates to his or her place in time and space. Perhaps a poet is from a particular country or a particular time period where the use of certain figurative language devices is prominent. Also, we can analyze a poet's choices and why he or she might have made them. And most importantly, we can analyze how a poet's use of language impacts theme or purpose. So let's take a look at this poem first. It's number 5 on your poem sheet, called I Wandered Lonely as a Cloud by William Wordsworth. Yes, that's his real name, a poet with the last name Wordsworth. All right, let's read it together. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of golden daffodils, beside the lake, beneath the trees, fluttering and dancing in the breeze. Continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way, they stretched in never-ending line along the margin of a bay. 10,000 saw I at a glance, tossing their heads in a sprightly dance. The waves beside them danced, but they outdid the sparkling waves in glee. A poet could not but be gay in such a jocund company. I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth the show to me had brought. For oft, when on my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude, and then my heart with pleasure fills, and dances with the daffodils. I love that one. So in this poem, we've got sort of a story going on. We've got a guy wandering around, and he spies next to a lake a field of daffodils. These flowers are daffodils right here in the picture, so you can see what they look like. And he sees these daffodils, and he's overwhelmed with how beautiful they are, even more beautiful than the waves and the lake. The way the breeze tosses them about, the way they seem so cheerful and happy. And it really lifts his spirits. But he had no idea how much his spirits were lifted, and what an impact this field of daffodils made on him. Check this out right here. I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth the show to me had brought. So sometimes, often, he says, for oft, when he is down, lonely, not thinking about anything in particular, he'll think about that field of daffodils, and it cheers him up. So this field of daffodils is somewhat like his happy place, All right, so this poem is very powerful. We notice that it contains similes. We know that similes are comparisons using like or as. We've got two here. He compares himself to a cloud in its loneliness because you're kind of high above, and not down amongst people, so he's lonely. We've got another one here, continuous as the stars that shine and twinkle on the Milky Way. He's comparing the daffodils in the field to the stars in the Milky Way galaxy. So there's lots of them. We've got lots of personification. We've got the waves dancing up here. We've got the flowers dancing. And then we have pathetic fallacy, and that's something that you may not have learned about before. Pathetic fallacy is basically personification, but you're giving this inanimate object, and a lot of times it's something in nature, like a wave. You're giving this inanimate object human emotion. So when we say that the daffodils outdid the sparkling waves in glee, glee is happiness, and we're giving the waves that human emotion, and so that's pathetic fallacy. Down here at the bottom, we've got personification, pathetic fallacy. Again, a heart being filled with pleasure. Of course, that would be giving a human emotion to an inanimate object, although a heart's not necessarily something in nature. And then once again, the heart is dancing, which it can't do because it doesn't have legs, so that's personification. Now, synecdoche is when it's sort of a metaphorical explanation, but when we use the part of something that's a physical part of it to represent the whole. So here, he says, my heart with pleasure fills. And it's not just his heart. His whole being is filled with happiness. But heart here is used to represent the person. And so that makes it an example of synecdoche. All right. We notice also here we've got a rhyme scheme and a definite pattern of meter. You've got here cloud, crowd, hills, daffodils, trees, and breeze. So we've got A, B, C, C. And each of the stanzas follows that pattern. We've also got a pattern of syllables. And so let's think about that for a sec. We'll count them up. I wandered lonely as a cloud. That's 8. That floats on high o'er vales and hills. That's 8. When all at once I saw a crowd. 8. A host of golden daffodils. 8. So you could spot check that throughout, but I think you would find that it holds true. So we've got a definite rhyme scheme and a definite pattern of meter. You could easily put the letters and describe the rhyme scheme to me. All you would need to be able to tell me for meter is that it definitely has a pattern of meter. All right, what might the speaker's purpose in this poem be, and how do the specific similes and examples of personification add to that purpose? Well, the purpose, as we talked about before, was expressing how these daffodils have become his happy place. And each of the similes and almost all of the examples of personification emphasize that happiness. Before he saw this field of daffodils, he was lonely, and after, he was happy. And we've got stars that twinkle, we've got daffodils that are tossing their heads in a sprightly dance. So it's all really positive and happy, and that adds to his purpose, to tell us all about his happy place. All right, this next poem is number 9 on your poem sheet. So take a look at that one with me. It's called First Lesson by Philip Booth. Lie back, daughter, let your head be tipped back in the cup of my hand, gently, and I will hold you. Spread your arms wide, lie out on the stream, and look high at the gulls. A dead man's float is face down. You will dive and swim soon enough where this tide water ebbs to the sea. Daughter, believe me, when you tired on the long thrash to your island, lie up and survive. As you float now, where I held you and let go, remember, when fear cramps your heart, what I told you. Lie gently and wide to the light year stars. Lie back, and the sea will hold you. This is one of my favorites. And it is about a very particular kind of lesson, and I'm sure you figured that much out, that it's a swim lesson. So this speaker, speaking directly to his daughter about swimming at first, okay? Maybe when she was a little girl, he taught her to swim. And round about here, sort of undergoes a shift. All of this is the mechanics of learning how to swim. You got to float on your back. If you remember learning how to swim, probably someone held you under your back, or maybe let your head rest in their hand, like he's saying. You have to spread out your arms. You learn to float face down in a dead man's float. And then you learn to dive and swim. But right here, we've got a change going on. He says, daughter, believe me, when you tire on the long thrash to your island, lie up and survive. As you float now where I held you and let go, remember, when fear cramps your heart, what I told you. Lie gently and wide to the light year stars. Lie back, and the sea will hold you. He stops talking about an actual swim lesson. He's talking about life, okay? So in swimming and in life, when you encounter trouble, it can be difficult. You might even describe life as a long thrash to your island that you get tired of. He says when that happens, lie up and survive, float. All right? And remember, when things get crazy, when fear cramps your heart, remember to float. Okay? So this floating becomes kind of symbolic of her relying on the lessons her dad has taught her throughout the years. And so it gains an extra level of depth when we realize that he is talking to her in depth about life, not just about swimming. So let's take a look at the figurative language. There's apostrophe in this one. Apostrophe is when a poem addresses a person or an idea or an inanimate object. Here, the daughter is being addressed. The poem is addressed to her. So that's called apostrophe. We've got enjambment. And enjambment occurs when the thought is not ending at the end of a line, when the thought is spread out and ends maybe in the middle of a line. So that's a good example of enjambment. And authors use this a lot when they're trying to stay in a certain pattern of meter. In this situation, we're going to talk about meter in a minute. Now, connotation is really prevalent in this poem as well. If you describe a journey as a long thrash, that has a very, very powerful connotation. It's not just like a nice little swim, okay? It's a long thrash. That means it's difficult. You are struggling, all right? Using this word, a dead man's float is face down. That's a pretty powerful connotation. Dead man's float, everybody knows what it is. It is to float down. But he's trying to make the point that when things are tough, you lie back, face up, and float. So this whole idea of saying dead man's float becomes pretty important. Then he says here, when fear cramps your heart. That's a powerful connotation, this word cramps. We all know what it feels like when you're swimming or in any time for a muscle to cramp up. It's intense, and it's hard to think about anything else when you're undergoing a muscle cramp. But he says, when this happens to you, remember what I've told you. Remember what I've taught you. Remember how to float on your back. And then these beautiful things happen here. He says, lie gently and wide to the light year stars. Lie back and the sea will hold you. And so you've got this negative connotation here. And then if you choose to float, this really beautiful image here at the end. All right, so we kind of answered this question. The poet wants the daughter